Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Cheney, the CEO of the American Security Project, and welcome to our conference on cybersecurity risk, recovery, and resilience. Let me first thank the members of our Business Council, and I know there are several here who have helped sponsor this event, especially Fortinet, who's our primary sponsor. A lot of work has gone into this event over the last month plus. I have to thank Mike Farmer and his staff. Mike, you're here somewhere. He's out back. They've really done yeoman's work in this regard. And our staff here at ASP has too, and they've done it certainly without my help at all because I spent the last 2 weeks running around Europe. For those not familiar with the American Security Project, founded in 2005 by Senators Kerry, Hagel, Hart, and Rudman, and the intent was to cover topical issues from a national security perspective. We are a 501c3 nonprofit educational institution. We've been most active in nuclear security, climate change, asymmetric operations, terrorism, and public diplomacy. And our board was purposely comprised of businessmen and women who would support the operation, public officials, and in particular distinguished flag officers. Normally we have 2 to 3 from each service, usually 3 and 4-star, retired. Our current chairperson is Governor Christine Todd Whitman, who many of you are familiar with. We've always had an interest in cybersecurity, but really have never made the step to do something about it. And with a gentle nudge from my board, we're now starting to work in this particular arena. Let me talk about some ground rules for the afternoon. First, this is all on the record. We will be tweeting, and I think the hashtag is up over there, and there's our website. We are Wi-Fi'd in here, by the way. We'll record it. We'll put it all up on the website probably Friday. It is a long day, but I think it's a particularly worthwhile day given the subject that we've got. We had a record crowd RSVP to this. I realize the space is a little tight, so be a little considerate of the folks next to you. Provided we have the time, my intent is to have a Q&A after each session. So after I introduce the Admiral and the Admiral talks, if we've got the time, I'll do a moderated Q&A. Now let me talk for just a second about cybersecurity. Everybody's familiar with cybersecurity somewhat and the problems of cybersecurity. I would tell you that last week I sat in a hotel in downtown London and opened the page, and the second page discussed the cyber hack on the Burger King inside the Pentagon. So I thought, boy, if you think our papers are bad, you ought to look at the ones in England. But again, everybody's concerned about cybersecurity, and we're going to talk about a number of those topics today. We're really, really delighted to have a distinguished Navy Admiral who's going to kick off the events. Admiral Donnell Barrett is the Deputy Director of Current Ops at U.S. Cyber Command. An incredible career. You've all seen her biography. Deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, Haiti, multiple assignments in communications and computer fields, 4 master's degrees, published 25-plus articles. She undoubtedly knows this field exceptionally well. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Admiral Barrett.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks for the kind introduction. And don't let the degrees impress you or influence you. I just got the wrong one the first 3 times, so, you know, it is what it is, right? No, but I'm really pleased to be here and honored to have been asked, and thanks for letting me come. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about U.S. Cyber Command, some of the challenges we have, and some of the things that we're concerned about overall. How many people in the room work in cyber field now, are experts in cyber? Raise your hand. If you're not, it's okay. And if you are, don't be shy. Tell us. Yeah, okay. All right, so for the folks that are cyber professionals already, some of this may be a little remedial for you, or you've already heard the story, so just bear with me. But I'd just like to level the playing field so everybody understands the threats that we're facing and what we need to do about that. Okay, so first slide, please. Okay, so this slide a little bit just kind of talks to us from the military perspective about what we consider the nature of cyberspace. And for us, this is sort of our 5th battlefield, if you will. So when we think of our traditional battlefields, what do we think of? Land, sea, air, if you're Air Force, snake eaters, everything and the above, right? You know, the special warfare guys, right? But this domain's a little different. Those are all physical domains. Those are all really well known, tried, true, tested for years, hundreds and hundreds of years, right? We've been operating those domains. This is a new domain. This is in the logical, and that's hard for people to grasp sometimes. And it's hard for people to understand how that logical fits into those other domains of warfighting and how we need to protect that and make sure that that is just as available as an aircraft carrier or an F-35 or a special warfare operator, okay? So those physical domains, we know them. We got them like the back of our hand. The logical one, pretty new. And so for us, the ARPANET is the genesis of where we all are on networks today, you know, many, many years ago, with the DoD's Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPANET. That was limited when they started that, the genesis of the internet. When that started, that was limited to people who were trusted on a very small domain. Everybody knew who that was on there. But it was a way to share information. And cybersecurity wasn't a concern back then. They were more interested in, okay, how can I share information? Now, that's grown to 2.2 billion people or more, 3 billion on the internet. Now security is a concern because people's motives aren't necessarily as altruistic as, hey, I want to share information anymore, right? They want to get the advantage. And most of those users are unknown and untrusted. I don't know about you, but since I work in this business, I don't trust anybody on there. I don't trust any connection. I don't trust, you know, it's just the way it is. You know, you're very skeptical if you work in this business, right? So anyway, the conceptual framework of openness now clashes with, okay, how do I defend? How do I do defense in depth? So as that took precedence, data integrity and security took a back seat. And now we're seeing that the problems that has caused, that whole philosophy is now changing, as you well know. Okay, next slide, please. So we look at the exponential threat. When we talk about Moore's Law, how many people have heard of Moore's Law when it comes to processor speed on computers doubling every 18 months? Well, that's like your grandma's law now. I mean, things are just moving at lightning speed. And as they are, we see the rate of technological growth, how people use the internet, and how people are using mobile devices. Do you remember the first mobile devices? You see them in the old movies. It was like the brick that weighed 400 pounds, and you know, you have the 5 batteries that came with it, right? How many people had one of those? Anyone admit it? Oh, we got some users. Nice. Okay. Don't tell me you're still using it, otherwise you know. Okay. But how do you connect? What do you do on the internet? What do you do on the internet right now? You're using the internet right now. What are you doing? Yeah, I'm looking at you, Mr. Phone. What are you doing on the internet right now? Tweeting. Okay, all right. So social media, instant communications. Although I'm not a big Twitter fan, because I'll be honest with you, I find it a tool for the narcissist. Like, hey, I just pulled lint out of my belly button in 140 characters or less, right? So, but it's great. You know what I did find it useful, though, I'll tell you, is when I was in Haiti, because I could see right away where there were I could follow where people were saying, hey, I don't have water, I don't have food, I don't have whatever. But anyway, normally I don't get on Twitter very much. Maybe I'm too old, I don't know. But anyway, so you use it for things like that, social media, connection with people. What else do you use it for that you didn't 15 years ago? Everything. Yeah. Research, banking. My directions here. I got lost getting here, but you know what? I was on my navigation tool getting the directions downloaded. I mean, we do everything our whole lives. I track my kid. She's away at college. I track her. Hey, you're not home from that party yet. You better get home, right? Right? Everything is connected. Your refrigerator now tells you need to get eggs on the way home from work, right? So it can be a little daunting. And the amount of money that we put into things, and we think we know what's going on, but how many people in here have a device that is tracking or is connected to the internet that you didn't authorize, that you didn't know about? Does anybody have any of those? I can probably guarantee if you just bought a microwave, you do. Or if you just bought a car, you do. Has anybody seen the Leslie Stahl 60 Minutes where her car got hacked while she was driving it? So they did a little demonstration and showed how they slammed her brakes on and she didn't touch the brakes and all that kind of stuff. So all these unintended consequences of connection too. And again, just gets back to security. It's going to change our behavior in ways that we didn't anticipate. The openness in the days of that will be in the rearview mirror when it comes to the balance. So next slide. So the way we look at cybersecurity environment in the military, we're real familiar with these layers here, the people and the geographic. So the geographic is what we always know, right? The way we parse up the military is by geography. So I have Southcom, Southern Command. They do South America. I have CENTCOM, you've probably heard of that, Central Command. They do Afghanistan, Iraq, the stands. We have European Command, focused on Russia. We have Pacific and other countries in Europe. We have Pacific Commands, so focused on all the Asian countries. But how does cyber play into that? Does cyber know geographic boundaries? Does cyber care about geographic boundaries? mean, what do I do when my hacker may be in Russia, but the jumping off point for their box is in Malaysia, and then the actual attack happens in the United States? Well, that becomes an infinitely more complicated problem, and one that, several years ago we weren't structured to deal with. Each component commander, how do you deal with that kind of thing? And how do you deal with that trans-regional way of looking at it? So the middle three layers are where we're kind of starting to define that. And that's where it's continually morphing, becoming challenging. That geographic layer, like I said, something we kind of always knew. The physical layer, that's just for you geeks out there, your OSI level 1, your Ethernet, your technical, it's your routers, it's your boxes, the physical. The content is, okay, what information is on that you're using, your Twitter applications, the information you're exchanging, files, websites, email. And then the cyber layer, the identity layer, is who you are on that network. So how often do we think we know who everybody is? You get an email from somebody, well, maybe it's been spoofed. How many people have gotten those emails? And I don't mean the one that we used to get from Mr. Mugabe in Libya, who's offering you $10 million if you give him your bank account number. Hope you guys never did that, right? But I'm talking a little more sophisticated. It's an email from somebody you know, and it looks legitimate. It says, click on this link. How many have gotten those? Or from your bank? Yeah, I would be surprised if almost everyone in this room hadn't gotten one of those. Hopefully you're not clicking on any links. I tell my kid, you click on a link, I'm not cleaning your computer again. Do not click on any links ever. But again, it's becoming more sophisticated, and what we think we know, that cyber identity that we think we have, we don't really have, and we can't trust. And so how do you get that trust so that you can use the benefits of the internet, the goodness of connectivity? And in the military, we have the same exact issue. It's just compounded. So 2 important points here. We build networks for ease of communications, not security. We bake, in the past, that's the way we've done it. We sprinkle on security. We don't bake it in from the ground up. So that's changing now. And as we're building networks, we have to start thinking about how do we bake that in from the ground up so we're not trying to sprinkle something on later as a Band-Aid to something that's become a crisis. The convergence of technology and increasing complexity networks makes it really challenging to identify that one person, and that's something that Cybercom that we are working to try to address within military context. It's very important for us. If you receive an operational order, you need to know it's not from Mr. Mugabe, right? It's from a legitimately identified source. Okay, and then the physical layer, again, cyberspace for us is constantly challenging. A lot of the equipment that we buy comes from all over the world, so how do we ensure the security of the equipment we buy and that we intend to use? Next slide, please. Okay, so one thing I wanted to talk about just on this slide is, everybody's heard of big data, right? Okay, there's tons and tons of data out there. So much data that we can't even process it. But we at US Cybercom, we need that just as much as people in banking and people at Walmart and people in nonprofits who are running their businesses using the internet to be able to share information so that we can do defense better and protection better. So the internet was made for that open, but use of big data and be able to use other people's data and share that's very important. We have very close relationships, which I'll talk about in a little bit, with other agencies, for example, to share that, and so we can help. But the internet's at your fingertips, not going to change. Next slide, please. So convergence of opportunities. These are opportunities for us and opportunities for others as well. So as you see, all the means, the physical layer, with what are those opportunities to use that or exploit that? So our adversaries get a vote, right? They can do the same things we're trying to do, they're trying to do. Gather information and do cyber planning. That's what we do. Well, our adversaries are probably doing that too. And I'm not just talking nation states, I'm just talking any adversary. Could be a Russian terrorist group, could be a hacktivist group, could be anybody, lone wolf, just intent on, a script kiddie, So all the things that we are concerned about, attribution of cyber attack, intelligence collection, being able to maneuver how we need to, when we need to in cyberspace, those are things too that they get a vote on. And we have to be conscious of that. So those vulnerabilities are things that are constantly trying to be exploited by all sorts of people with all sorts of motives. And so that's something we are always dealing with. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a build. We'll see how good the PowerPoint skills are at US Cybercom if it works right. Okay. So far I'm impressed. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Okay. The bottom line is the cost to entry for all these folks is very low. How much do you think it costs to build the USS Ford, the latest aircraft carrier? And I'm going to talk Navy because I love Navy, right? But what do you think it costs to build the Ford? Give me a number. Just throw it out. $6 billion. Higher. Higher. Way higher. Close. $13 billion. How much does an F-35, the latest and greatest airframe? Oh, I'm getting laughs in the crowd. Is this a sore subject? Okay. How much does an F-35 cost to build right now per airframe, roughly? Too much. Good answer. $85 million is the estimate I saw on the Lockheed Martin site this morning. I tried to get the latest. Okay? And oh, by the way, that has 7.5 million lines of code in that airframe. I don't even know what's on the carrier, but it's a lot, I'm sure. Okay, so how many actors in the world, as we call them bad actors, have $13 billion to throw on that problem? Have $5 billion. What do you think the cost of entry for one guy that you can train to disrupt your network costs? $100, right? $200? My point is the cost of entry to disrupt this capability that we all rely so heavily on, whether it's me in the military or you guys in your civilian life or your commercial life, is so low and so ubiquitous. How hard is it to have a hacker create a tool and then put it out to everybody? It costs them nothing, right? So the cost of entry and the amount of damage they could do in the disruption, we're going to talk a little bit about that too, where we're concerned about that, is so low. This is something we have got to pay attention to. It makes it more challenging than ever. There is no regulatory body for the whole internet. Yeah, we have the WC3 and they set some standards for how web things work, and we have people who assign IP addresses and things like that, but there's no governing body for the whole world. There's no one single authority. Encryption's widely available, and encryption could be something that, it's free and they're exchanging it, they develop their own. Well, that's a problem, right? If they develop all these really complicated encryption things that we can't see what's going on, then how do we defend against that? And then international boundaries, like we talked about, completely non-existent when it comes to the cyber world. So how do you enforce that? Even from a commerce perspective, how do you enforce paying the taxes on things? I mean, we see that even in the United States, right? So the targets are changing all the time, and then the users. I will be honest with you, the users of networks can be our biggest problem. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's good cyber hygiene, not clicking on that link. How basic it is to have people, someone clicks on a link, now that's hundreds of hours of cleanup work for you at your organization to try to figure out what happened and what kind of damage that did. Just having the users being aware of that, right? Okay, so next slide, please. So the U.S. and our allies are targets. Right now we estimate that there's more than 100 nations and non-nation states that are actively going and trying to listen into our communications to see what we're doing. And that's not all the people who are hacking, that's just people who we know that are listening to us and watching us and doing those kind of activities. They're collecting information about weapon systems and trying to hack into our most critical computers and our SCADA systems and things. The average computer out of the box can become infected in minutes. The minute you connect it to the internet, it's vulnerable. I get so paranoid. When you buy a new computer, you put it online, the first thing I'm like, don't anybody touch it. I'm getting the antivirus software working. Seriously, it's the minute it's connected. And it just takes 2 seconds for something to get downloaded. And they're getting so crafty now too. You think, hey, well, I'm smart enough, I won't click on that, or I won't visit a porn site, or I won't visit these places where the gambling sites or whatever, right? But the reality is, it could be something as simple as you have a pop-up window that comes up and you click it closed, but there's code behind that pop-up window that's now executing and you didn't even know it. You thought you were just doing the right thing, right? So even they're just making it harder and harder for the average user to just keep themselves safe, let alone someone in defense or in the military. So next slide. Disturbing trends. They're looking for exploitation of vulnerabilities. They're looking to disrupt, and they're looking to destroy. This is not just a denial of service attack anymore where, hey, let me just flood you with so much traffic that you can't get to your own information. Now, this is destruction, physical destruction that can result. And so let's talk about a couple things like that. One of the things they teach us in the military is never assume away an enemy capability. Never assume an enemy can't do something. Because the minute you do, everything else in your plan is going to fall apart because they will do it. You got to assume the worst. You got to plan for every kind of possible contingency. Over the past 2 decades, DoD has observed a disturbing trend from exploitation to disruption, and the next step, which is destruction. From exploitation to disruption, then destruction. So for example, we've seen some basic exploitation in the beginning. China, when we talked about the F-35, 79% of the software in China is pirated, okay? And that's a lot of our business software too. And they're not the only country. 75% of users of the internet have been victims of cybercrime. How many people in this room have had an identity stolen or had been victim of crime or had something spoofed or had to replace? How many? I mean, a fair number. It's very, very unusual if you haven't been. You're the minority if you haven't. Couple other ones, denial of service attacks. We talked about that. That's been happening since 2008, and we have adversaries who are good at that. That's the tool they want to use. It was used in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia in 2008 with the Russian air campaign. They put a denial of service attack in conjunction with what they were doing physically, kinetically. And then we have cyber activity that was observed with cyber rioting and crowdsourcing. Tapping into that global hacker community, the hacktivists, if you will, and having them pile on. I mean, that's a very unpredictable environment. How do you plan for that? And who would jump on that bandwagon? And so 2012, we had major financial institutions get hit by those denial of service attacks too. JP Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, PNC, New York Stock Exchange. This is big business. And if we don't think those companies aren't concerned about that, then we're dead wrong. I mean, their whole reputation relies on, and a lot of times, they don't want to tell you, right, that they've been hacked or that you've lost all your data or whatever, okay? So again, we're seeing the denial of service attacks continue, but let's talk a little bit about some of the destructive capabilities on the networks. So Shamoon infected more than 30,000 computers in Saudi Arabia's Aramco in 2012. Anybody heard of that incident? Okay, that was a big one. These attacks were deemed destructive because they actually wiped out operating systems. And companies lost all personnel data, financial, maintenance records. So while that doesn't sound as destructive as, say, blowing up a generator, it's very destructive to the operations of that organization. We saw it again with the Sony attacks in 2014. The kind of data that they were able to get. Now, that was probably related more to the movie coming out and all that, but whatever the motives were, it was certainly disruptive, and it was certainly lessons learned for everybody about what the impact can be. Even if it's just the disclosure of all that personal information and emails was incredibly embarrassing for that company. So even if it's not a physical destruction, it impacts the ability of that organization to function. One of the ones I wanted to bring up that was particularly interesting was the attack on the hydroelectric plant in Russia. One of their they have the largest power grid that's automated with their infrastructure. And we're always worried about SCADA, right? Our systems for controlling our water and our electric grid and those kind of things, our national infrastructure, our critical infrastructure. So what happened at the Sayano-Seshushaka, if I said that right, hydroelectric plant was that it was remotely increased the power supply to the electric station after a fire. And what happened was the power station violently broke apart, causing catastrophic destruction at the plant. 10 turbines were damaged and 75 people killed. And that was from remotely going in and doing something on the computer that they thought would help with that fire suppression. But you could see how that could be used by an adversary against you, how that kind of attack could happen on our SCADA and our infrastructure, and how well are we protected for that? Okay. Next slide. So who are the threats and who are the actors? Let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously, everywhere in cyberspace, but you've got hacktivist groups like LUSEC and Anonymous. You may have heard of Anonymous. Critical elements of terrorist organizations. We see that now with some of the things that ISIS is doing, ISIL. You see also, criminal organizations using the internet in this way, holding people hostage. And one of the biggest vectors that we have, though, one of the biggest problems we have is the negligent user. So one of the reasons Cybercom was established, actually, came out of an operation called Operation Buckshot Yankee. Has anybody ever heard of that? Okay, I'll just talk about it a minute. So what Buckshot Yankee was some foreign malware ended up on DoD's classified networks too, because we have unclassified networks and then we have other higher levels of networks, classified and top secret and that kind of thing. But what happened was we had a service member take a thumb drive, put it into a computer on a lower classified network, download some stuff, and then move it to a higher classified network. But what it also moved was that malware. and which then executed. Okay, so that kind of thing is something that no one kind of foresaw that. We didn't plan for that. But again, our adversaries are very crafty, very creative, and so the result was all stop on the use of thumb drives. Of course, even Navy, we even glued the little ports, the USB ports, so you can't put the thumb drive because sailors will find a way to do it anyway. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, but the point was that was an eye-opening experience, and not only did it result in physical changes and procedural changes, but organizational changes. It was one of the things that drove standing up a command that could then do something, because we kind of realized in DoD, hey, we don't have an overarching command to deal with something like this across all the services. And it just keeps us vigilant as ever. Okay, next slide. So let's look at some malicious activity statistics. I don't know if this is really small, you can't read it, but bottom line is, social scams, right now we see a lot of those, that's 42%. Keylogger, that's where someone has some software on your computer and they're logging what you're putting in as your password or where you're going. And then spyware, backdoor, phishing, adware. So you can see those are the kind of threats that we're dealing with. And if you think you're on a Mac and you're safe, you're not. You may be a little safer, but you're not. So don't think that if you're just on a Mac. A single threat last year infected 600,000 Macs. So again, just don't think you're immune to it. And the number of phishing and spoofing on social networking sites has actually increased over 125% in the last 2 years. So that is just going to exponentially grow. So the more we can figure out how we counter that, the better protected our networks will be. Next slide. So talked a little bit about kind of the threat and what's out there. And I always just want to address, okay, what does U.S. Cybercom do about that? What is your military doing about that? So for us, the big key is mission assurance. So sometimes you'll hear information assurance or kind of a compliance methodology, a compliance thinking. But we're not thinking about just being compliant with, hey, do this to your network. We're thinking about it in terms of how do I ensure that I can have the mission completed, whatever that mission is. It could be an aviation mission enabled by the networks that support it. So how do I secure and operate and defend the Department of Defense networks? How do I make sure that the Joint Force Commander who controls the planes and the airplanes and the soft guys can do their job? That's kind of how we look at it and articulate our problem set. So we don't want to go down to just, hey, compliance, put this patch on here. No, I want to ensure I can do my mission. Make that assurance the number one thing. Next slide. So how we do that is through U.S. Cybercom. It's a 4-star command. It's run by Admiral Rogers, Admiral Mike Rogers, who is also the director of the NSA. He's dual-hatted, as you probably know. And then we have a whole staff underneath them. And it's a traditional sort of Napoleonic structure, if you're familiar with how the military is organized, not much different from others. And we are a subcomponent to U.S. Stratcom. Next slide. So how we got to where we are, a couple things. It grew out of 2 commands that we had previously. One was the Joint Force Command, Component Command Network Warfare, and then the Joint Force Global Network Operations. You may have heard those terms in the past if you're familiar with military. But the bottom line was back in 2002, U.S. Strategic Command kind of started looking at this cyber problem and this and organizing itself to deal with some cyber things. And then every year since then, up through 2010, when our organization stood up, we've been making concerted efforts to make that even better and stronger. And it's still changing. We may become in the future our own component commander. On par with others like Stratcom, not reporting to Stratcom. But those are things that are all in the works right now. Next slide. Sorry, some of the things are very small, but okay. So what does it take to do cyber operations? It's a coordinated effort on all these kind of things. You have to do assessment, target analysis, develop cryptologic ways to secure it. You have to have incident response. You have to be able to do forensics. You have to be able to produce intelligence that you can act on, that you can now be preemptively looking for, not just responding. Because a lot of things you see in the news, it's just like, oh, we just got hacked, and everybody has to jump and respond, right? Or, oh, my company just got hacked. Same. So how can we get better collectively as the U.S. government in being predictive about the threats and the vulnerabilities and the capabilities of our enemies and getting that out so people can put defenses in place to protect against it? Next slide, please. So how do we do that? We have a lot of partners. We work very closely, obviously, with NSA because we're right in the same building. But we also work very closely with CIA, Department of Homeland Security, FBI. And we each have different authorities about what we are authorized to do and aren't authorized to do, but we work collectively with those other organizations to make sure that we can protect and defend our networks. And we have a lot of interaction with civilian companies, with academia, with nonprofits, with research organizations like DARPA. And we also do a lot with our coalition partners. You know, our coalition partners, UK, Australia, Japan, whoever, they're all dealing with the same kind of threats that we are. And so we share quite a bit with them. And we even have watch officers that we exchange as liaison officers that work with us day to day. Next slide. So our 5 strategic priorities are, okay, how do we build a defensible architecture? Now, we've got what we've got right now, and I'll tell you how hard it is to build a defensible architecture. I just came out of a job in the Navy where we upgraded networks on ships. So we'd have to plan for the money to pay for those, and then we'd have to get them out to the ships. Now, that sounds like a pretty easy problem, right? Hey, how hard can it be to upgrade a network on a ship? One of the ships that we just upgraded before I left was the USS Vela Gulf, and they were operating on a network from 2001. This was 6 months ago. How many people in this room have a 13-year-old computer at their home that they're using? Right on. I don't know how you're doing it, but good on you. Media, oh, okay, all right, yeah. You're Smithsonian ready right now, right? You just donate it now, my friend, right? But my point is, you know, it is a hard problem. As much as we would like to say, hey, let's just get everybody in the whole military right up to that top level of what's the best you get. The reality is the budget can't support that. Operational schedules can't support that. I can't rip off a network on a carrier that's in the Gulf right now doing close air support strikes for Afghanistan to put a new network on because everything's tied to the network, right? So you have to know, how do you build that defensible architecture and how do you build it so we can get it out more quickly? We have acquisition rules too that make it really hard to buy things quickly and get them fielded quickly, and that hurts us when it comes to defense. Okay, authorities and policies and rules of engagement. We don't always have all the authorities that we would like, and we continue to work that to do things like to defend the way we want, or attack the way we want, or do those kind of things. So those are things that the NSA and U.S. Cybercom continually work to try to refine to make sure we have the authorities we need to do to defend our networks and operate our networks. We have to have a large number of people who are trained. We spend months and months and months and years training people to be cyber experts. And sometimes, you know what they do? They go work out in town, right? They decide, okay, I'm done with military. And everybody does at some point. We all kind of say, okay, I'm just ready to hang up my uniform time. But when we lose somebody that we've invested that much in, you can't replace that person overnight. All the experience and everything else. So it's a challenge for us because, we don't get the biggest salaries on. We're not in this business for the paycheck because we get a lot less than we probably could if we were doing something else. We're in it for the sense of service, for the uniqueness of the jobs we do, for the things we can contribute that way. And so it's very difficult and challenging sometimes to keep those highly skilled teams in place. And then the situational awareness and enabling, that's another piece on there. One of the things we want to make sure is that we're sharing that knowledge of the threat with as many people as broadly as we can so that people can protect across all areas of the U.S. government and the civilian world. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how do we do that sort of from a military perspective is we have some teams. So we have about 6,200 people that are on 133 teams, basically, that are in place to do specific cyber missions. So there's a team of folks. They're really like sort of your ninja warriors. They're really well trained up. And they go and they have these specific ones. So we have national teams that defend the nation against adversary attack, blocking, maneuvering. We have combat mission teams that are assigned to those component commanders that we talked about, Southcom, CENTCOM. They each have their own groups that work with them. And then we have cyber protection teams that do the big defensive muscle movements for us and try to defend our networks. And then everywhere throughout the services, too, they have their own organizations that do cyber defense at the local level. Next slide. So again, this is a partnership between many people. You can't do this alone. We at US Cybercom can't do this alone. And we look for the good ideas out in industry, too, and in other areas of government, and lessons learned to be shared. So you saw this happened to you. What did you do about it? Because we don't want to have to live that same lesson. Next slide. Okay, and this is a little hard to see, but it says, there I was, stuck on a Chinese firewall, and suddenly the router lit up like the 4th of July. Bots were left to me, Trojans to the right, lost some good servers that day. So our whole concept in the military of what warfighting is changing too. So and it'll continue to morph. As you see, even now, think about the way we do aviation. We used to have a pilot in every plane. What's happening now? Drones, UAVs, UVs. I think the days of, this is just me talking, don't quote me on this, go ahead and quote me, but don't quote me. But I think the days of piloted aviation for a lot of our things that we do are going to be going away. And so, but what did all those platforms that we're going to be using those UVs have? Connection, comms, networks. They have to get information back and forth to them because there is nobody sitting in there flying that physically. So anyway, the whole way we've even done our traditional lines of warfighting is changing. So it's a challenge for us, and we have to keep up with that. So subject to questions, I'd be happy to take a few questions if you want.
Admiral, fantastic. We've got a limited amount of time here, and I promised her that we'd be done by 1:15 because she's got to put out the latest fire over at Cyber Command. So what I'd like to do is we'll do a quick Q&A. We've got a roving mic. If you could raise your hand, I'll pick on you. If you could say who you are, what your affiliation is, and a very short question. We might be able to fit in a couple here if we're quick.
Sure.
So I see a young man right here on the right side.
Hi,
I can hear you, yeah.
Energy Wire. I was just curious, you mentioned critical infrastructure protection as one of the core missions. Where would the military step in there? Are the lines very clear as to when a cyber attack, say, on like private infrastructure might demand a response from the U.S. military? Thanks.
So as you know, the Department of Homeland Security does the critical infrastructure. We only assist as requested by them. So if they had something they needed our help with, they would request. And that's one of those coordination things and collaboration things that we do. We are not tasked with protecting that day to day ourselves. That's Department of Homeland Security. But we would step in should they ask us, and if OSD, they wouldn't ask directly to U.S. Cybercom, they'd ask to OSD, and then it would filter down. So if OSD gave us the order to do whatever, then we would do that. But we work with DHS every day, sharing information and that kind of thing.
Somebody on the left. Have we stunned you? Yes, ma'am, right here. Let's wait for the mic.
Hi, thank you, Admiral, so much. That was very enjoyable. You brought up Haiti and Twitter, and I just wonder what your thoughts are. One of the best situationally aware maps out of the Haiti crisis was the one produced by the Harvard graduate students, where they used that publicly available Ushandi map and then used Twitter feed to populate it. Even the Coast Guard used that map to operationally deploy assets. So what are your thoughts on how you can control your cyber environment or the inputs into your environment when the military is now tasked to respond to these crises and they're using clearly civilian
Social
assets?
media, yeah. So it's a challenge. So what you would do is, in the military, we like information to be vetted and perfect, but in a crisis, you're not going to have that. Okay, so sometimes you may have to say, hey, 60% confidence is good enough for me to move out and move a team of people to, maybe set up a landing zone for moving patients to the USNS Mercy, which is a ship that does operations and medical care. You know what I mean? So for example, while that site's set up, and I encouraged our operations officers to use that site, just like the Coast Guard did during that. Because if they could see a whole high volume of something happening, whether it was, in this case, it was always, I need water, I don't have water, I'm out of fuel, like some of the NGOs, I'm out of fuel or whatever. If we could see that kind of traffic on there, we could vector things over quickly, even if it wasn't totally vetted, where we would say, oh, we're 100% confident that's the problem there. But you could at least check it out and get something over there quickly. So sometimes you have to work with imperfect information, whether it's in a disaster relief scenario or in real world combat. You don't always have perfect information. Now, would I call in a close airstrike based on a Twitter feed? Probably not, okay? But my point is there's certain circumstances where you can use it, or you can use it as a tipper to look into it a little bit more to confirm what you think is happening there. So it's very useful from that perspective for real world, on the ground, what's happening now, to try to get a general feel. Yeah.
General, right down here in the front.
My name is Munir Zaman. I'm from Bangladesh. I wanted to know, Admiral, is there a code of conduct that can be worked on, at least among the major powers that use extensively cyber capacities? And what are the rules of engagement of major powers for retaliation of cyber attacks?
Well, there are not rules that we have agreed upon, to the best of my knowledge, that are set in stone for what happens, what's the automatic response to things. So those planning groups are ongoing. Those kind of discussions are ongoing. But not to the best of my knowledge do we have specific treaties or anything that lay out specifically what those are. That's something we're struggling with. That's something we're having to try to figure out.
I can take one more. Yes, sir, right here in the front. Let's wait on the mic.
I'm lucky. All right, thank you. You mentioned
And
insider.
your name is?
Andre Chambers with Evans and Chambers Technology. Sorry. You mentioned insider threat as one of the threat vectors. We're noticing that insider threat, the data that kind of gives you a total insider threat picture, cuts across several departments within any one organization. What type of guidance are you giving organizations that are reaching out to you on how to co-locate those particular folks within a department and the data that they harness to give a total insider threat picture?
Well, so a lot of this is probably good hygiene for any system administrators too. Whenever you have an incident, what's the first thing a system administrator will do? Look at their logs, right? But you should be looking at your logs all the time to kind of see things that are going on and see, oh, that's unusual. Someone just did X on the network. That's unusual. Or people, who have behavior exhibited at work that's just unusual. Asking you a bunch of questions that you don't normally get asked if you're the system administrator, or the calling you up, hey, this is the help desk, give me your password. Those kind of things. You got to have your users attuned to those kind of things. And so we look for best practices on the hygiene level to look for those indicators that might be an insider threat. And then once we find something, if we find something new, obviously we share out, hey, this happened, and this was something we hadn't been looking for, but I recommend you look for that as well. I mean, it's just kind of it gets back to a lot of good hygiene, a lot of checking windows and doors, which doesn't always get done because staffs get short and they're answering the latest crisis on the network, and oh, I'll check those logs later, or I'll give that training to users later. That can wait. The problem is it can't wait a lot of times, and even the insider threat in civilian organizations. I mean, they have tools and things that they run that look for anomalous behavior that are kind of give them a clue that hey, something's just not right. Someone putting up a wireless router on a node in their network, for example, or plugging the wrong device in, or using the device incorrectly. Yeah. Don't just those is my point. You got to look into everything.
Well, Admiral, your comments were fantastic, and I wish you would stay till 5 o'clock so we could have you on every panel. No, I know.
And you guys get some sleep then.
We've got a number of great panels coming up. We would love to have you longer, but you were fabulous. So let's give her a great round of applause.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.